Okay, let's unpack this. You sent us a truly fascinating stack of sources that dive into some of the most fundamental questions about existence: creation, free will, the specific role of angels, and the very nature of the soul.
It's definitely a deep dive.
Yeah, this isn't just standard theology, is it? It feels more like an intense exploration of the cosmic mechanics, the theological architecture of creation itself.
That's absolutely right. These sources provide a really detailed blueprint for how creation operates, particularly within this realm they define as Hades.
Right, and we should probably clarify that term Hades up front because it's not quite the underworld people might think of.
Exactly. When the sources use Hades here, they're not just talking about the place of the dead in, say, Greek mythology. They're using it as a term for the entire created universe of space and time.
The physical reality.
Yes, the physical reality where things are born, live, and die. They contrast it with the purely spiritual, angelic heavens.
Got it. So the tension we're diving into today is this central question. Does God, who is infinite, all-powerful, does he create everything in this physical realm, this Hades, directly?
Or does he command others?
Yeah.
Specifically the angels. Are they the ones executing the plan? That's the core tension.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive then is to follow that exact chain of command. We're going from the infinite God down through the potential intermediary action of angels, right down to the creatures of Hades. And we need to understand why the construction of just one creature, Adam, who seems to be the definition of free will in this whole setup, why is he so fundamentally tied to validating the truth of divine love and justice for, well, everything?
It's a huge question. And the core thing for you, the listener, to keep in mind as we go through this is we're trying to figure out who actually did the hands-on building of creatures in Hades, especially Adam.
But not just who, right? It's the why that matters.
Exactly. Why does that distinction, God versus angels doing the building, why does it matter so much when you're talking about guaranteeing perfect free will and ensuring fair ultimate judgment? The integrity of how it all got started isn't just a minor detail. According to these sources, it's the entire foundation of the universe's purpose.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Section 1, creation and the chain of command. Here's where it gets really interesting right off the bat. The sources immediately establish the ultimate authority. God created space and time, but for him, they are, and I'm quoting here, as if they were not. He's totally outside it all.
He's the infinite source, encompassing everything, even non-existence.
Right. But here's the twist. Despite being able to do everything himself, perfectly, instantly, the sources keep pointing out that God frequently commands his creatures, including the angels, to do things, to work. Why? Why the delegation if he doesn't need the help?
Yeah, it's a profound question. It seems to speak more to the nature of the divine design rather than any kind of divine need. God is all-sufficient, infinite. He doesn't need labor.
So it's not like he's outsourcing because he's busy.
Not at all. The sources seem to imply that this delegation is part of the system's architecture itself. It's a way of involving other high-level beings, the angels, in the process of creation and sustaining it.
And that principle leads directly to the core hypothesis we mentioned.
Exactly. That God may have commanded angels to create the creatures and perhaps the entire realm of Hades.
So instead of God personally, scooping up dust and forming Adam, we might be looking at an angelic construction crew, working from divine blueprints.
That's the picture some views paint. They could be the architects and builders of our physical universe, following God's exact specifications.
Okay, but what about the how? If angels are building things, what exactly are they building according to this theory, and how are they doing it?
Well, the theory posits that angels receive God's commands. Think of them as detailed designs, instructions, blueprints to construct both the realm of Hades, space, time, the earth itself, and its inhabitants. That includes the physical bodies of Adam and the animals.
So the universe isn't just sustained by God, which is maybe more familiar, but its actual physical assembly might have been, well, outsourced, metaphorically speaking.
That's the idea being explored.
Okay, I have to push back a bit here, though. Do angels, as we usually think of them, spiritual beings, do they even have the capability to create complex physical stuff, like a body made of dust? Aren't they more like messengers, guardians, not material engineers?
That's a really critical challenge, and the sources absolutely address it. They suggest angelic capabilities might be far broader than just spiritual guidance. Now, crucially, any power they have is received power. It's loaned from God. It's not inherent.
Okay, so it's not like they have their own independent creative force.
Not at all. But the sources look at certain kinds of miracles as potential evidence of their ability in the physical realm. Think about those accounts where missing limbs are instantly restored or even generated, seemingly from nothing.
Right, like a hand just appearing.
Exactly. The source argues that acts like these suggest angels might possess the ability to create physical forms, or at least to assemble and generate matter from the basic elements, the dust of the earth, following the divine pattern.
Huh. So if they can potentially regenerate a complex structure like a hand, maybe they could assemble the components of a whole body from scratch using the available materials and the divine plan.
That's the reasoning presented, and their potential involvement might extend beyond just biology. The sources also suggest angels could be the ones managing celestial bodies, the stars, the planets, the whole mechanical function of the cosmos.
Like cosmic governors, keeping the clockwork ticking.
Precisely. All operating under God's direct instruction and sustaining power, of course. But this would establish them as highly capable builders, having access to the materials, the dust, the elements, and the technical know-how, the blueprints provided by God.
Okay, so we've got the ultimate command from God, the sustaining power, which you mentioned we'll dig into more later, and potentially this angelic labor force. Now, when we look specifically at how Hades, this physical realm, was created, the sources lay out three main possibilities, especially concerning Adam, who seems to be the absolute linchpin.
Yes, this distinction is crucial because Adam's creation is central to the whole purpose.
Can you walk us through those three views again? Let's unpack the implications of each one.
Certainly, these three possibilities really highlight the different potential degrees of direct divine involvement, particularly focusing on Adam.
Okay, view number one.
The first view is, as you said earlier, the most straightforward. God personally created everything in Hades, directly. No intermediaries for the building process.
So God formed Adam's body from dust, made the animals, set the stars in place, all direct action.
Correct. This maximizes God's direct involvement in the making, but minimizes any need for delegated authority in the creation act itself.
All right, what's the other extreme?
The third view represents the most indirect execution. God commanded angels to create everything in Hades through them.
Everything, including Adam's body, and maybe even his soul components.
This view suggests the angels were the comprehensive, hands-on builders of the entire physical realm and all its life forms, following God's command and design precisely. That would include Adam's physical body and potentially, as we'll discuss, even aspects of his soul.
Wow, okay. But the sources, they seem to spend quite a bit of time on the middle ground, right? The option that suggests a kind of strategic split in the labor.
They do, and this is really where the nuance about Adam's unique purpose comes sharply into focus. The second view suggests this. God personally created Adam's nephesh, specifically, the soul component containing his free will, and then commanded angels to create everything else.
Ah, okay. Now that is fascinating because it implies that building the physical stuff, stars, planets, animal bodies, even Adam's dust body, that's maybe safe to delegate? But the creation of the core moral engine, the part of Adam responsible for understanding and obeying the commandment, the free will itself, that's so critical, so central to the whole cosmic test, that it had to be handled directly by the source to guarantee its perfect integrity.
That is precisely the compelling logic behind exploring view 2. If Adam's entire purpose is to perfectly verify the truthfulness of God's commandment through a completely undistorted choice,
then the mechanism making that choice, the soul, the free will, has to be absolutely pristine, above any possibility of error or, importantly, any creaturely interference, even well-intentioned interference.
Exactly. So if God handles the soul directly and the angels handle the dust body and the rest of the physical setup, it potentially maintains the integrity of that crucial moral faculty while still utilizing the delegated structure with the angelic labor force for the physical construction.
So the core takeaway from this section before we move on seems to be, regardless of who did the hands-on assembly work, whether it was God's direct action for everything or angels building the bodies according to plan, or that middle view, the source, makes it absolutely clear, unequivocally, that God is the ultimate sustainer of it all.
Absolutely. That cannot be stressed enough. Even if angels created Adam's body, the source emphasizes that God sustains the angels, who are then acting within that sustained existence to assemble the body. So the source concludes, God is ultimately the one who creates.
Because he's the source of existence itself.
Precisely. The delegation of assembly, if it happened, does not and cannot mean a delegation of existence. Existence itself flows continuously from him. And that thought brings us perfectly to the next critical piece of the architecture, the Word, the Son.
That is a perfect bridge. We've talked about the chain, starting with the Father, the ultimate source. Now we move closer to the active mechanism of both creation and sustenance. The Word, also identified as the Son.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We really have to place this whole chain of command concept within the context of the Word. The sources hammer this point home, emphasizing that all created things, and the lists they pull from Scripture, are incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah, things like
Heaven and earth, visible and invisible things, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, all of it was created through the Son and for Him.
And they point to specific passages for this, right?
Yes, key texts like John 1.13, which is foundational. It establishes the Word being with God, being God, and that absolutely nothing was made apart from Him. And Colossians 1.15:17 is another pillar, emphasizing the Son's preeminence, that all things in heaven and on earth were created by Him and for Him.
So this suggests the Son isn't just, the ultimate goal or the beneficiary of creation. He's the active conduit, the mechanism through which the Father's blueprints are actually rendered into reality.
He is both the conduit and the ongoing structural support, the lifeblood, you could say. Every single creature, whether it belongs to those purely spiritual angelic heavens or to this physical realm of Hades, exists only because of the life the Father continuously gives via the Son.
Continuously, that's key.
Absolutely continuous. If the Son were to cease channeling that life-giving, sustaining energy for even, a microsecond, the entire universe would instantly wink out of existence.
Wow.
The source quotes Hebrews 1.3 directly here. The Son's powerful word sustains everything. It's an active, ongoing upholding.
Okay, wait. Let me try and connect this back. If God commanded angels, potentially, to build the stars, but the Son is actively sustaining the stars, how does that relationship work on a practical level? Is the Son like the power source that the angel builders are plugging into?
That's actually a really helpful analogy. Think of it like this. The angels, if they were the builders, are following the architectural plans. They're assembling the materials, the dust, the elements. But the very existence of those materials, the fundamental laws that govern how they behave, gravity, physics, all of it, and the sheer power required to hold them together against entropy and decay, all of that flows through the Son.
So without His continuous powerful word, the building blocks themselves wouldn't exist, or the laws they follow would vanish.
Exactly. The universe would just unwind. It would collapse back into non-existence. The angels, in this view, are operating entirely within the framework and the energy field provided solely by the Son.
Okay. This concept of the Son being present and active before the physical world was even established, this is echoed in some really ancient texts the sources bring up, right? They mention Proverbs 8, where the Son is identified as wisdom. Can you tell us about that primordial role?
Yes, Proverbs 8 is fascinating in this context. The Son, explicitly referred to as wisdom there, is described as being present before the beginning of His works.
Yeah.
This isn't presented as just an abstract idea. The text portrays wisdom as actively involved in the creation process.
Actively involved how?
It says wisdom was beside the Father, acting as the creator, or some translations say the master workman. This was happening when the heavens were established, when the sea was given its boundary, when the very foundations of the earth were being laid out.
So involved in the design and the execution of the physical laws, the boundaries that define this realm of Hades. But this brings up a huge theological puzzle, doesn't it? One, the sources themselves acknowledge this mystery of presence. How exactly did the Son interact with the angels in this whole creative process before the incarnation? Before the second person of the Godhead actually became a creature within space and time?
This is where things get incredibly deep, and the sources are careful acknowledging the mystery. They state pretty clearly that the full, unveiled glory of God was inaccessible even to the highest angels.
Angels couldn't see God directly.
Not the Father, not in His full essence. Before the Son became a creature, a physical, time-bound being they could interact with more directly later on. So the question becomes, if the Son was directing the angels to create Hades, how did that command get transmitted if they couldn't directly perceive Him in His pre-incarnate state?
Yeah, that seems like a paradox. How do you command a creation project if the builders can't see you or directly interact with you?
The speculation offered is profound. The source suggests the command was likely mediated, not through a direct appearance, but through the name of God placed on the actual throne in the angelic heaven.
Okay, hold on. We need to pause and unpack that phrase, the name on the throne. That sounds very specific, maybe even a bit technical. What does that mean, practically speaking, for the angels receiving the command?
Think of the name not just as a label like Bob. Think of it as representing the full authority, the power, and the very essence of God, but invested or focused in a specific point of reference that the angels could interact with.
So the throne in their realm, the angelic heaven, is like the command center.
Exactly. It's where God's power and authority are, in a sense, centralized and made manifest in a way creatures can perceive. Placing the name there means the authority of the Father, channeled through the Word, is projected and becomes accessible to the angels. They can perceive it, they can receive instructions from it, they can obey it.
Without being instantly consumed or annihilated by the full, direct, consuming presence of God himself, which you mentioned we'll talk about more later.
Precisely. It maintains the absolute integrity and authority of the command, because there's the command of the Word, but it respects the necessary ontological separation between the infinite creator and the finite, and importantly, crime-capable creature.
Okay, so the angels are getting their orders, their blueprints, carrying the full, unchallengeable weight of the word's authority. But they aren't like staring into the infinite abyss of God's full glory. It's more like getting orders stamped with the president's seal, delivered by a trusted emissary. The authority is absolute, but the presence is mediated.
That's a very good way to picture it. It preserves both the command's power and the creature's existence. So, the sun's interaction during that primordial creation phase might not have been a physical manifestation as we'd understand it. It could have been through wisdom, the word acting as the inherent intelligent design principle itself, or perhaps channeled through the Holy Spirit, who the sources say is fully present within creation.
But either way, the design, the instruction, and crucially the sustaining power holding it all together all flowed from and through the sun.
Correct. Ensuring the unified plan, the integrity of the whole creative act, regardless of who did the specific building tasks.
So we've established that whether angels built the body or God built the body, the power, the design, the continuous existence, it all relies absolutely on the sun. Creation is fundamentally unified, even if the labor was potentially divided. Which means the really critical question now shifts. It moves away from the mechanism of building and focuses squarely on the purpose of it all. And that purpose, according to these sources, centers entirely on the soul.
That is the perfect pivot. Because honestly, the entire theological weight of this material, everything we're discussing, rests on the distinction we're about to make. We have to zero in on the key difference between just basic life and Adam's specific, commandment-aware, choice-making life, the soul.
And the sources use those three distinct Hebrew terms we need to get clear on: nefesh, neshama, and ruach.
Yes. We need to establish what makes Adam's soul the seat of his free will, utterly unique in the created order of Hades.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. What about the animals? What kind of soul or life force do they possess?
We begin with nefesh. This term is often translated as soul or life or even creature. It represents the animal soul, the basic life force. Genesis 1.24 is key here. It says that when the earth was commanded to bring forth living creatures, it brought forth the high nefesh.
High nefesh, living creature or living soul.
Right, and the source emphasizes that this tells us the nefesh, the soul or life force of animals, originates from the earth or dust itself, just like their physical bodies. It's an earthly component tied to the physical realm.
Okay, so animals are also called living souls, high nefesh. And Adam, later in Genesis 2.7, after God breathes into him, is also called a living soul. That seems to suggest they share something fundamental, maybe biologically.
They absolutely share the nefesh component, the basic life force animating a physical body. But the crucial absolute difference the sources stress is the lack of free will in the animal nefesh.
Explain that. What does the animal nefesh do if not make moral choices?
It guides their instinct, their survival drives, their movement, their basic consciousness. They have life, they experience things. But they lack the capacity for moral reasoning, for understanding and responding to abstract law, or for genuine worship of God. They operate based on power, the power of instinct, physical dominance, the natural order.
Not law.
Exactly. They don't submit to law in the theological sense, the rule of love, justice, divine commandment. They can be trained by power, but they can't choose to obey a moral law out of love or duty.
And why is that distinction so necessary according to the sources? Why not just give animals free will too if they're living souls?
The sources suggest this is absolutely crucial for the framework of judgment. If animals possess genuine free will, they would also possess moral accountability.
They'd have to be judged for their choices.
Precisely, because the principle seems to be that every creature endowed with free will must ultimately be judged according to the rule of love and law. Since animals lack that free will, their nefesh remains bound to the earth. It's a temporary life force serving a biological purpose within Hades, but it lacks that cosmic moral accountability. Their existence ends with their physical death.
Got it. And this animal nefesh, this life force, is very closely tied to the physical body, specifically through the blood, right? Which you mentioned has huge implications for atonement and redemption later on.
Yes, the source heavily emphasizes this physical connection, primarily using Leviticus 17, verses 11 and 14. Both state clearly that the nefesh, the life, the soul of the flesh is in the blood.
The life is in the blood. Seems straightforward biologically, but what's the theological significance?
It creates a direct link between life, soul, blood, and sin. The reasoning goes like this. It's the soul, nefesh, the animating life force, that utilizes the body to act in the world. Therefore, when transgression occurs, it's the soul that sins by using the body.
Okay.
And for atonement, for the penalty of that transgression to be paid, the soul itself must be poured out or surrendered. Since the nefesh resides in the blood, atonement requires the pouring out of the blood. It's a visceral, physical representation of the soul's life being given up to cover the transgression.
I see the link. But given that animals, as we just established, lack free will and therefore can't morally transgress the commandment, why did their sacrifices, their blood, matter at all in the Old Testament system?
They mattered only symbolically, according to this interpretation. Because the animal nefesh contained in the blood lacks the capacity for moral choice or willful disobedience, its sacrifice could only point towards the ultimate necessary sacrifice.
Right.
It couldn't achieve actual atonement for a being with free will.
It was a placeholder.
Exactly. A placeholder illustrating the mechanism required the pouring out of the soul contained in the blood. It symbolized the future, perfect sacrifice.
Right.
The blood of the Lord Jesus. His blood, the sources argue, carried a nefesh that contained perfect free will, perfect understanding, and chose perfect obedience. Therefore, his soul, poured out in his blood, was capable of providing true, actual atonement for Adam's soul, which possessed free will but failed in its obedience. Animal sacrifices were just shadows pointing to that reality.
Okay, that clarifies the role of the animal nefesh and blood. So now finally we get to Adam. If the animal nefesh arises from the earth, what was different about Adam? What did God breathe into him in Genesis 2:7 that created this unique capacity for choice, love, and following the command?
This is the absolute key. Adam, uniquely among all the creatures of Hades described, received the high neshama, often translated as the breath of life or the living breath.
High neshama. So Adam also has a nefesh. He's called a living soul, high nefesh, just like the animals.
Yes, that's critical. Adam is, like the animals, a nefesh, a living soul enclosed in a physical dust body. They share that basic structure. But Adam's nefesh is different because it has been imbued with, or perhaps activated by, the high neshama.
And it's this high neshama that grants him
Free will, moral awareness, the capacity for true worship, for understanding and obeying divine law, for choosing love even when it's difficult, like loving enemies. It fundamentally alters the nature of his nefesh.
So maybe think of the nefesh as the biological hardware, the basic operating system for life in Hades.
Yeah, that works.
And the high neshama is like the divine software upgrade, the spark that installs moral accountability, connects him to the realm of law and commandment, and distinguishes him utterly from the animals who operate purely on instinct and power.
That's a really good analogy for how the sources seem to present it. The role of the high neshama is precisely what separates Adam, making him capable of a law-based existence. It establishes him as the crucial figure, the representative for all creatures with free will, the one whose choice will test the commandment itself.
Now, this high neshama is obviously incredibly important. The sources mention there isn't just one simple definition. They outline 4 different ways theologians have tried to interpret what this breath of life actually is or represents. Since this is the absolute pivot point of Adam's creation, we probably need to spend a moment dissecting those 4 views and what each implies.
Absolutely. The fact that there's discussion around its precise meaning just shows how much theological weight rests upon this single concept.
Okay, what's the first interpretation?
The first view suggests the high neshama represents Adam's free will itself. Simple, direct. In this view, the primary gift God breathed in was the sheer capacity for moral choice, the autonomy to choose between good and evil. The integrity of the soul is the integrity of that choosing faculty.
Makes sense. What's the second possibility?
The second view interprets the high neshama as Adam's ruach, his spirit.
Wait, ruach, that's the third term you mentioned earlier. So this view suggests Adam got body dust, soul, nefesh, and spirit, ruach from the neshama, all at the very beginning.
That's the implication. It complicates the sometimes simpler body-soul division, or even later body-soul-spirit models, by suggesting Adam received a higher spiritual element right from the start. This ruach, given via the neshama, would be what enabled his direct connection to God, his capacity for spiritual awareness and communication.
If Hai Neshama is the Ruach spirit, does that suggest Adam's fundamental nature, his ontology, was actually created closer to the angels than to the animals? Because angels are often understood as Ruach, as spirits with free will.
That's a fascinating implication of this second view. If Adam received ruach immediately, it does suggest a shared ontological foundation for free will and judgment between him and the angels. It strengthens that link we mentioned earlier, the idea that Adam's choice had direct consequences for the completion or perfection of the angels' free will, too. They might be operating on a similar platform, so to speak.
Interesting. Okay, what's the third interpretation of the Hai Neshama?
The third possibility is that the Hai Neshama represents conscience, the internal moral compass.
So not just the ability to choose, but the innate knowledge of right and wrong.
Exactly. This view suggests the primary gift wasn't merely the capacity for choice, but that internal guide, the awareness that allows him to discern the commandment, to feel guilt, to understand justice naturally. The neshama provides the moral framework within which free will operates.
All right. And the fourth view, you mentioned this one seems perhaps the most profound, connecting back to the word, the sun, we discussed earlier.
Yes, the fourth interpretation is that the Hai Neshama represents the Spirit of God, or perhaps even the Word himself, imparted directly.
Wow. The word breathed into Adam.
The idea stems from the theological premise that the Word is Spirit and that truly living according to the divine commandment, especially the highest forms like loving your enemies, requires more than just capacity or conscience. It requires a direct, pure connection to divine life, truth, and love itself.
So to fulfill the deepest parts of the law, you need the lawgiver dwelling within you, in a sense.
That's the implication. If the Hai Neshama is the very Spirit of God or the Word, it means God didn't just give Adam the ability to choose love. He directly implanted the essence of his own love and truth into Adam's soul, making perfect obedience a genuine, achievable possibility.
Okay, so whether we interpret Hai Neshama as pure free will, or as spirit, or as conscience, or as the indwelling word spirit, the bottom line is stark. This distinction is absolutely critical. It forces us to recognize that Adam's soul isn't just another biological component, it's unique. And since his soul holds this special capacity granted by the neshama to understand, choose, and follow the command of love, the integrity of that soul's creation becomes paramount. It's not just important, it's the linchpin for the entire cosmic system presented in these sources.
Exactly.
Which leads us directly into the next section. The staggering cosmic stakes involved in Adam's choice.
That's the logical next step, because the sources argue that the ultimate purpose of Adam's creation, his existence in Hades, was far, far greater than just starting the human race. It was nothing less than to verify the truthfulness of the commandment itself.
To prove that God's law is actually doable, fair.
Exactly. And by extension, to confirm God's own intrinsic nature, his love and his justice. Adam is the test case.
So Adam acts as a kind of cosmic validator. His initial free choice is the experiment that proves whether the whole system God set up is righteous and workable. What happens, according to the sources, if Adam fails? What are the consequences if the test subject can't pass the test?
The stakes are presented as the highest imaginable. Adam's choice determines whether the core command, the command of love, is truly achievable by a creature operating with perfect, God-given free will.
Okay.
Now, if that command cannot be kept, if it's fundamentally impossible, maybe too difficult or inherently contradictory for a finite creature to obey, then the implications are catastrophic for the nature of God himself.
How so?
The sources argue that if the command is impossible, then the entire project of creation, this whole realm of Hades, was established only to be ultimately burned or killed, because failure is inevitable.
The command becomes a trap.
Worse, it becomes, and this is the source's direct language, a murder weapon, a tool designed specifically for the creature's destruction, ensuring failure and justifying punishment.
Wait, okay, I have to stop you there because that language is incredibly strong. The source material actually claims that if the command is impossible, God would be a murderer and a liar. That's extremely provocative theology. Can you break down the internal logic from the source that leads them to such a stark conclusion? We need to be clear we're reporting their view here.
Absolutely. We must follow the source's stated logic precisely on this point. Their reasoning is, if God issues a command, you must choose love, or you'll face the consequence, which is death destruction. And he knows, because he designed the creature, that the creature is fundamentally incapable of choosing love, maybe due to a flaw or the standard being impossibly high.
Then he knew the outcome from the start.
Exactly. He would have created the creature knowing it was doomed. He would have set it up for failure. In that scenario, the source argues God would be a liar because he presented the command as a genuine path to life, choose this and live, when in reality, it was an unavoidable death sentence.
And a murderer?
Yes, because the command itself, being impossible to fulfill, becomes the very instrument he uses to bring about the creature's predetermined destruction. The law, meant for life, is twisted into the weapon that kills. That's the logic trail the source lays out for that provocative claim.
Wow, okay. That completely flips the script on the purpose of the law. So the only way God's justice and love are validated within this framework is if Adam could have succeeded. His failure had to be a genuine, free choice to disobey, not an inevitable outcome of his design. Or, alternatively, his success had to be a genuine, free choice to obey.
Precisely. The possibility of success, the achievability of the command, must be absolutely guaranteed in the creature's design.
And the universal impact of Adam making the right choice had he done so initially.
It would have been monumental, according to these texts. His victory would prove the command is truthful, it is achievable. That, in turn, proves God's love, giving a path to life, and justice, judging based on a fair standard, are real, not illusions.
And there was another layer, too, involving the angels.
Yes. Crucially, the sources note that this verification, the successful choice of love by a perfectly free creature in Hades, is somehow necessary for the final perfection or completion of the angel's free will as well. It's like Adam's choice resonates upwards, confirming the foundation of law for all creatures with free will.
So the fate of space and time, and even the state of the angelic heavens, somehow rested on Adam's single, perfectly free decision.
That's the scale presented, which brings us right back to the issue of integrity. For the judgment to be fair, for this cosmic verification to be trustworthy and meaningful, Adam's soul, particularly his free will component derived from the high neshama, must be, to use the source's specific term, perfect.
Perfect, meaning flawless, without any glitches.
Absolutely flawless in its function as a choosing mechanism. The soul must be a perfect measuring stick for the commandment's truthfulness. The source insists, and this is emphatic, there must be absolutely no error, manipulation, or ambiguity in Adam's soul or his free will. None.
The standard of judgment must be perfect.
And the free will being judged must function perfectly according to that standard. There can be no hidden bias, no subtle programming forcing him one way or the other. The choice must be entirely his.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate using the source's logic. What if that integrity was compromised? Let's say, going back to view 3, the angelic builders, maybe unintentionally, introduced some tiny flaw, some minute distortion into his soul structure while assembling him. What would be the immediate consequences of that imperfection?
If Adam's free will was distorted, even slightly if he was created with a tiny inherent bias towards self-interest, perhaps, or maybe subtly prevented from fully comprehending the depth of the command, to love the sources say the whole system collapses instantly.
How so? What are the consequences?
Well, first, and most obviously, he could not be justly judged. Rewarding him for obedience that was somehow pre-programmed, or punishing him for a transgression that was basically unavoidable due to a design flaw, wouldn't be justice. It would be tyranny.
Right. That makes sense on the individual level. But what about the bigger cosmic consequence you mentioned?
The commandment itself could not be verified as truthful. If the test creature, Adam, was fundamentally incapable of upholding the command because of a structural flaw in his equipment, his soul, his will, then the failure isn't Adam's moral failure. It's God's failure as the ultimate designer or overseer of the creation process.
The blame shifts from the creature to the creator.
Precisely. And that would invalidate the entire purpose of Adam's existence, which was to prove the command was just and achievable. This is why the source and integrity of the high neshama, the component granting free will, is so intensely scrutinized in these texts. It absolutely must be pure, functioning exactly as intended, to yield a true, undistorted, meaningful choice.
This brings us right back to that big ontological question we touched on earlier, didn't we? The creation source and free will.
Yes.
Can an angel who is described as a spirit, ruach, with free will inherent in its spirit nature, can such a being create a soul, nephesh, a different kind of entity, and imbue it with perfect free will? Does the act of a lower-level being's freedom being created by a higher-level creature, the angel, somehow inherently compromise that freedom?
That is the core difficulty that View 2, where God creates the soul directly, attempts to neatly solve. The source definitely flags this as a point of tension. It notes that ultimately, at the Great White Throne judgment, Both soul and spirit seem to receive equal judgment based on their choices.
Judged by the same standard.
Yes, judged on the same fundamental standard.
Yeah.
Free choice and obedience to the law of love. The source then speculates, if they are judged equally, perhaps their capacity for free will must originate from the same source, meaning directly from God, the ultimate source of all life and law, rather than through an intermediary creature like an angel.
That makes logical sense. Yet the final conclusion in the source material seems to pivot slightly, doesn't it? It seems less concerned about who specifically did the building and more focused on the results of the building.
That really is the essential takeaway for you, the listener, to grasp from this section. The source concludes that the ultimate guarantee of integrity isn't definitively tied to the identity of the builder, God versus angel. Instead, it rests entirely on the operational result. The free will, however it got there, must be wholly and perfectly Adam's.
Meaning no interference.
Zero interference in its function. Even if angels did create Adam's body and soul components according to a perfect divine blueprint, the resulting free will must operate without any distortion from the builders or from God himself. The sources are clear. No creature, not even God, interferes with Adam's granted free will. God leads, advises, commands. Satan tempts and deceives, but the actual choice remains Adam's alone.
So the bottom line is, if the angels could, theoretically, create a nephesh containing perfect, undistorted free will, precisely following God's specifications, then delegation for the soul might be theologically possible within this framework.
Potentially, yes.
But if they couldn't guarantee that absolute, pristine integrity, if there was any risk of creaturely fingerprints on the mechanism of choice, then God had to do the soul creation directly, as in view 2. The non-negotiable element is the absolute perfect integrity of Adam's capacity to choose.
Absolutely. Because if that integrity failed, the entire project of verification, that the whole reason for Adam's creation and the existence of Hades as this testing ground, would fail before it even properly began.
Okay. We have established the necessity of this perfectly created, perfectly free creature Adam operating under the sustaining power of the Word. Now let's step back and look at the environment God created for this incredibly high-stakes choice. We often hear and assume that God is fully present everywhere, omnipresent, but these sources introduce a really complex theological point, almost a paradox. The idea of the hidden God. That God actually limits his perceived presence within creation, specifically within Hades, in order to sustain creation and allow it to survive in its current, imperfect, and, as the sources say, crime-capable state.
This is a really profound discussion, delving into God's transcendence versus his immanence. On the one hand, God is beyond space and time. He is everywhere in the sense that nothing exists outside of him. Even non-existence is within his potential because he can call things into being from it.
Right. The ultimate reality.
Yes. However, the sources propose a deliberate, necessary restraint on his manifestation within the created order of space and time. Specifically, they suggest that the first and second persons of the Godhead, the Father and the Son, do not manifest themselves within space-time in their full, ultimate, unveiled glory.
Not fully.
Not in their essential infinite nature. The Son, as we discussed regarding the Incarnation, only manifests himself within space-time after he becomes a creature, allowing him to interact on a level that space-time can actually handle.
Okay, this feels counterintuitive, though. Why would God, who the sources insist is love, need to hide himself from his creation? Wouldn't his presence be the ultimate good?
The core reason given is protection, preservation. God is described repeatedly in Scripture and emphasized in these sources as a consuming fire. A fire that inherently judges and destroys everything that is contrary to his perfect nature, sin, rebellion, imperfection.
Consuming fire.
Okay, so if God were to fully manifest himself, his ultimate unveiled perfect glory and justice directly to creatures like us, creatures who are currently imperfect, who are capable of crime and falling short of his perfect law of love, those creatures would be instantly consumed.
Instantly consumed, you mean destroyed, annihilated, just by his presence.
Yes. That's the stark picture painted. Think of it like trying to expose a delicate, flawed biological organism directly to the raw, unfiltered energy of a supernova. We, in our current state, are simply not built to withstand that level of absolute perfection, holiness, and justice.
So his full presence would trigger an immediate, unavoidable judgment.
Exactly. Any imperfection, any deviation from the perfect law of love, however small, would be instantly judged and extinguished in the face of his unveiled glory. It would reduce the imperfect creature back to nothingness. So according to this view, God deliberately hides himself, veils his full glory, so that he is not manifested to imperfect creatures as an immediate annihilating judgment.
So the act of hiding isn't rejection. It's actually a foundational act of mercy. It's what allows creation, allows Hades not to fail instantly, but to have the time and space needed to complete its purpose, the purpose defined by Adam's crucial choice.
Precisely. God desires the ultimate happiness and perfection of his creatures, not their instant annihilation. Hiding or veiling his glory allows the timeline of Hades to unfold. It provides a protected space, sustained by the word, where creatures can exercise their free will, learn, sometimes fail, and ultimately be brought towards perfection through the work of the Son.
Oh.
If the Father's full glory was immediately present, the system would short-circuit. Game over instantly.
This paints a picture where the Father is essentially waiting for creation to be made ready, to be perfected before he can fully indwell it without consuming it.
That's a good summary of the conclusion presented. The Father only becomes all in all, meaning fully and openly present throughout all of space and time. His glory unveiled after the Son has completed his work of eliminating sin and perfecting the free will of creatures, making them compatible with his presence, making them crime incapable.
So until that final completion, from our perspective as creatures within space and time, the Father is not yet fully manifest. His presence is mediated, veiled.
Correct. From the creature's perspective within Hades, the Father's full presence is a future reality, contingent on the successful completion of the Son's work, which itself hinges on the validation provided by perfectly free creatures choosing love.
It reframes the entire time-space continuum of Hades, doesn't it? It becomes less like God's finished living room and more like a protected nursery. Or maybe a carefully controlled laboratory sustained by the Son, where creatures are given the chance to exercise that perfect, undistorted free will, the free will rooted in Adam's nephesh, quickened by the high neshama, to verify the command of love, all before the full, potentially consuming glory of the Creator is finally revealed.
And that very concealment, that hiding, is only possible because God is infinite and transcends his creation. Even in this act of limiting his perceived manifestation within space-time, nothing truly exists outside of him. The limitation is for the creature's benefit, for the process to unfold. Yet the created realm, including Hades and the angelic heavens, is continuously sustained by the Father through the Word. If that sustaining stopped, they would instantly return to non-existence. The hiding is what allows the free will experiment, the verification process, to run its course without immediate, fatal judgment based on imperfection.
Wow. Okay. We started this deep dive by asking what felt like a relatively mechanical question. Who actually put the pieces together? Who was responsible for assembling the physical universe? Was it God directly, or was it angels following a plan? And just by following that chain of command, looking at the roles of the Father, the Son, the angels, and the unique nature of Adam, we ended up confronting the profound theological weight, the absolute necessity of a single, perfectly functioning free will Adam's nefesh, empowered by the high neshama. A free will that serves as the perfect, unbiased measuring stick for the truthfulness of divine law and God's own justice. That's been a truly monumental journey through these source materials.
It really has. The connections are intricate, but lead to some foundational conclusions. Perhaps we can try to synthesize the three most crucial takeaways for you, the listener, to carry forward from all this.
Yeah, let's crystallize the main points.
Okay, first, the chain of command in creation, as explored by these sources, ultimately confirms that all existence, regardless of whether the physical construction work was done directly by God or potentially through delegated angels, is fundamentally designed, continuously powered, and actively sustained entirely by the Word, the Son. He's the bedrock reality, keeping everything, from angels to atoms, from dissolving back into nothingness.
Right. Ultimate source and sustainer is the Word. Got it. What's number two?
Second, the critical difference, the absolute game changer between Adam and all other living creatures within Hades is the high neshama, that breath of life. Whatever its precise nature, free will, spirit, conscience, or word, it grants Adam's nephesh the unique moral capability to understand, choose, and obey the commandment of love and to worship God, a capacity completely absent in the purely instinct-driven animal soul.
The neshama makes moral accountability possible.
Okay.
And the third key takeaway.
Third, and perhaps the most impactful point regarding the whole system, the fairness of ultimate judgment not just for Adam, but potentially for the entire created order, including angels, depends absolutely on the premise that Adam's free will was created perfectly, without any inherent flaw, distortion, or manipulation.
Perfect integrity is non-negotiable.
It has to be. This ensures that his initial choice, whether obedience or disobedience, truly reflects the independent will of the creature. And that is what verifies, or fails to verify, the truthfulness of God's love and justice for the entire universe. The whole system hinges on that initial perfect test case.
So this entire incredibly intricate structure, the possibility of delegation, the constant sustaining power of the word, the creation of a perfect soul with the High Neshama, and even the deliberate hiding of God's full glory, it's all geared towards one ultimate goal: validating the core truth of God's righteous rule and his love, and doing so through the mechanism of genuinely free choice. The cosmic weight resting on Adam's initial decision, as presented here, truly couldn't have been higher.
It sets the stage for everything that follows. And this final, absolute necessity for perfect, undistorted free will in Adam leaves us with one last, powerful, provocative closing thought drawn directly from implications within the source material itself, specifically regarding the integrity of creation extending beyond Adam.
Okay, what is it?
If Adam's free will absolutely had to be perfect, flawless, unmanipulated to ensure that his judgment was fair and that the divine command was truly verified, what does that imply about the souls of all of Adam's descendants, meaning us?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Since the sources elsewhere affirm God knows all souls and their choices even before conception, were all subsequent human souls, also created perfectly alongside that first Adam, maybe as part of the original divine blueprint, ensuring everyone starts with the same perfect capacity. Or are souls created newly, individually for each person? And if that's the case, what mechanism guarantees that their free will, their capacity for choice, possesses the exact same perfect integrity, the same lack of distortion that the original Adam's was required to have? How is fair judgment and the possibility of truly choosing love guaranteed for every single descendant down through history? That's the massive question these sources implicitly raise, extending the requirement for perfect creation far beyond the Garden of Eden.